So before we begin to design all of our templates and the full drop and our half drop repeat, I want to share some things to note when it comes to understanding the mechanics and how these repeat patterns work. So when it comes to a full drop repeat, in a full drop repeat, artwork is repeated along the horizontal and vertical lines. The motif repeats perfectly along the vertical line of the fabric. It also repeats perfectly along the horizontal line. This is called a square repeat because the repeat often forms a perfect square. But as we're going to see with our project, we're going to be creating a rectangle shape repeat, and rectangle shape repeats are also considered full drop repeats. If your horizontal repeat, for instance, is a bit longer than your vertical repeat, the overall pattern would create a type of rectangle. And the same thing would happen if the vertical repeat was a bit longer than the horizontal. Either is a perfectly acceptable style of repeating pattern, and they're still considered a full drop repeat, and we'll see this as we're working on building our pattern. So the next thing I want you to know is when it comes to understanding a half drop repeat, the artwork is repeated along the horizontal and vertical lines, just like in a full drop repeat. But this time, however, the horizontal repeat is staggered. The motif repeats perfectly on the vertical line, but then it drops exactly half of the vertical repeat along the horizontal line. So looking at this from a visual perspective, the idea is that essentially the top and bottom of your repeats are exactly the same, just like what we see in a full drop. But when you're looking at the left and right, whatever you put on the left will go on the right, only it's going to go down half a step down as we see in this visual. Now I want to share some helpful tips when it comes to making your patterns. So my first tip is make sure your elements are cohesive and balanced. Balance will help your design feel visually complete and harmonious. You want the elements within your design to work together as a group. Make sure your colors work together, that any textures you use blend nicely, and that the layout works with the motifs that you've created, and that you are looking at the size of your motifs in relation to one another. The second tip I want to share is using contrasting elements to create visual interest in your design. Counter your concepts. So for example, softer colors might blend really nicely with a pop of color. Textured areas might work really nicely with plain areas of focus. Large and small motif designs combined to help create something interesting to look at. So think about contrast and how you can utilize that within your overall design. Tip number 3 is create an area of interest in your design or a focal point. The idea is to have one area draw the viewer's eye in more. This helps to ensure that your design isn't too overcrowded or busy. A focal point can be created with a specific motif or colorway. One motif can be more detailed than the rest, or a color can stand out within your overall design or pattern. My fourth tip is to play around with your pattern repeat design type. You're learning 2 different styles today, but I do have classes that teach 4 different styles. You can definitely check that out, but don't be afraid to change things up. If something doesn't feel right as a full drop, maybe try it in a half drop, or maybe check out something like a brick repeat, which I share in my last surface pattern design class. By changing the repeat type, you can change the look and feel of your overall design. Remember, half drops tend to make it harder for viewers to find where the repeat starts and finishes, so that's always a good option to go for. And my last and final 5th tip is play around with size and placement of your motifs. Try creating your layouts with 2 or more motifs in varying sizes. Also, you can flip and rotate your motifs so that they're not all facing the same direction. Personally, in our first layout that we're going to be creating, I show you a directional print, but that's just because I want to be really obvious about the placement of that top and bottom so you can see where those repeats start and end. But if you flip and rotate your motifs so that they're not all facing the same direction, this can actually help give the illusion of your layout being random, even if you're placing things in really specific areas. Also, keep the spacing of your motifs balanced and equidistant if you're going for an airier feel to your layout, but if you want a really dense feeling layout, don't be afraid to overlap items. And that's it for the tips to help make your pattern stronger. Now let's jump into creating our first repeat, the full drop but in rectangle format.